Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to Wiltfong Whiparound. No, I'm not Grace Remington. I am Lance Glynn. But of course, we are always joined by the director of recruiting for 24/7 Sports, and that is Steve Wiltfong. And Steve, it was a busy weekend on the recruiting front. You're, of course, coming off a trip to Austin for the OT7 event, which we will get to later in the show. But in terms of commitments, in terms of big visits, there's a lot to talk about. And let's start in the SIP. Let's start in Oxford, Mississippi. The Rebels landed 2 commitments for the 2024 class. So Lane Kiffin making some moves over the weekend. Jeffrey Rush, Chris Davis headed to Ole Miss. What is the program getting in both of these guys, and what could be next for Ole Miss in this 2024 class?
Yeah, 2 more of the state's top players announcing their commitment to Ole Miss. Jeffrey Rush, a massive pickup for the Rebels here right now, ranked as the nation's number 9 defensive lineman, number 61 prospect overall in the updated top 247 player rankings. He's 6'3", 250 pounds, a very disruptive player at the point of attack, can play at the edge, can play across the front. He's a pass rusher, he's a run stuffer, and he's a difference maker there in the trenches for Ole Miss as Lane Kiffin and company work to build up that defense. And I had a chance to talk to Jeffrey Rush after he committed, and he said when he was there at practice, he was watching, and the atmosphere was so live and fun, and the people there are so genuine and passionate about their players in the game. And when he talked to Coach Joyner, he said that was just the cherry on top. He said Coach Joyner's a great person, a great coach, and a person he looks up to, and that's what made him to commit. He felt at home. But also talking to the transfers that Ole Miss has in there for spring camp, those guys said they're the best players they've been since they've been at Ole Miss. So he trusts Coach Joyner to develop him into the number 1 pick in the NFL draft one day. He's definitely very talented, and to beat out Auburn, Miami, Colorado, and some of the others to keep him in state. A big recruiting win there as Ole Miss sits at number 16 in the 24/7 Sports Composite team recruiting rankings. Chris Davis also jumped in the fold out of Picayune Memorial. He's a state champion running back that shared the load with Dante Dowdell there, who signed with Oregon, but he's a two-way standout there that rushed for over 1,000 yards and 15 touchdowns, also had 30 tackles and 3 interceptions, just a really good football player that's excited to get up there and play for Kevin Smith and Coach Lane Kiffin, and sort of like Jeff Rush, he just liked the vibes in Oxford, felt the love there, knew it was home, and again, thinks that Coach Smith and Coach Kiffin are guys that can develop him, and likes the way that Coach Kiffin incorporates his running backs in that offense. Obviously, seeing the way multiple guys, Evans and Judkins, share the load and the priority it is to run the football there for Coach Kiffin and company. He's excited to get in there and do his thing. So Ole Miss, several teams landed some commitments over the weekend, but Ole Miss, the big winner on the recruiting trail this past weekend.
Yeah, you mentioned with Davis, obviously, I'm sure he saw what Kinshon Judkins and Zach Evans did this past season, and I know he's excited to get in that backfield and hopefully make his mark for the Rebels. One of the guys whose names we've been talking about so much, both on Wiltfong Whiparound as well as on the College Football Recruiting Show, Steve, is Air Noland, right? One of the top quarterbacks in the country for 2024, part of our War Daddy series as well. He has set a decision date. He's named his finalists. What can you tell us about Air Noland's recruitment right now, leading up to when he ultimately makes his choice?
Yeah, so his top 7 schools are Ohio State, Miami, Texas A&M, Alabama, Clemson, Arkansas, and Oregon. He's going up to Ohio State this weekend. He has not been there yet. He has not been to Oregon, but he has been on the other schools' campuses a few times, with the exception of Alabama, where he was once in January. And, I think that each of these visits has moved the needle. And this is a close one down the stretch. I think there's been a time where Texas A&M's been atop this recruitment. Miami's certainly been very prominent in this recruitment for a long time. His last visit to Arkansas was awesome as well. And then Clemson blew him away with the visit offer. And I expect Ohio State to do the same here when he gets up to the Buckeyes campus this weekend. So he told me that he's still working on getting it down to 1. But there's a lot of contenders in this one here, as I think he can see himself at a lot of places. He's going to announce his college decision on April 8th in the evening around 8:30 p.m. that Saturday night. And so there's still a little under 2 weeks to go in this recruitment as schools try and make their final pushes for Air Noland.
And you mentioned all of these schools that are finalists, Stephen. I was just looking at his player profile, and no crystal balls right now out there for Air Noland. So you really think, at least at this point, it kind of could be anyone's game to land him?
Yeah, again, like I think when we did the War Daddy series on him a couple weeks ago, or time's flying by, less than 2 weeks ago, I probably would have gave the slightest of edge to Clemson, but I think that Texas A&M and Miami have had visits since then, and he's loved both those programs. His mom told me she would have been very comfortable leaving Air behind at Arkansas when they went on their visit, and they love that Arkansas staff and the trajectory of the program and what KJ Jefferson's been able to do in that offense. And then again, he still hasn't even been up to Ohio State yet, and just what Ryan Day and Corey Dennis and those guys have been able to do at the quarterback position. He's also building a relationship with Brian Hartline. That's a school that could make a big move this weekend when he gets up to Columbus. So this is a recruitment that I think still has some runway before he makes a final decision.
Yeah, a lot of attractive schools, a lot of enticing offers there for Aaron Nolan to consider as he gets ready to make his decision in a little bit. So I mentioned at the top of the show that there were a ton of big visit weekends this weekend, but probably none bigger than Lincoln, Nebraska. Obviously, we know Dylan Raiola was there, but a ton of top talent took in campus, took in what Matt Rule is building there. What can you tell us about the weekend? What stood out? Who was there? And how big of an impression was this new staff able to make on the top talent that ascended on Lincoln, Nebraska?
A lot of energy, a lot of excitement around this Nebraska program as the football program is fully invested. They're building some facilities that any recruit that talks about it says they're going to be off the charts. So don't be surprised if in a couple of years people are saying Nebraska has the best facilities in college football. Obviously, they had 5 stars and blue chippers on campus this weekend that got to take in spring practice, got to go to a Nebraska baseball game, spend a lot of quality time with the Nebraska coaching staff. And the Nebraska coaching staff is just full of guys that do a really good job of connecting with players, making prospects feel at ease. They do a good job of getting in early on top targets and building relationships and having a stronger foundation with their top recruits than a lot of the schools that they're going up against for these young men. Obviously, Dylan Raiola was the headliner, arrived on Friday, left on Sunday, so spent a lot of time on campus, including hanging out with athletic director Trev Alberts, who the family has known for a long time. I talked to Rayola's father, Dominic, who said the weekend in Lincoln was great. It was great to see so many talented recruits there. It was their first time getting to see the new regime working on the field and in the meeting room. And that he pointed again that this isn't Coach Rule's first rodeo rebuilding a program, and they're excited to see him rebuild it up at Nebraska. It's a place that's obviously so special to the Raiola family, with Dominic having a great career there. His brother Donovan's the offensive line coach. And so they want to see Nebraska back at the top of college football. And they think with what Matt Rule has done historically and with the facilities that they're building at Nebraska, that they can get it done at Nebraska. And Matt Rule, he's planning on getting it done. He told Dylan Raiola, we're going to win here and we're going to win now. So come be part of this. And Dylan Raiola is a guy that can certainly help them long term. He's also considering Georgia, USC, and Oregon, among others. A lot of Georgia buzz coming out of his most recent visit to Georgia. I haven't heard anything different there, but I will say that, people that spent time with Raiola this weekend in Lincoln, they just said that have been around him at other places just felt like it was there's just a different kind of smile on his face when he's at Nebraska. And there are people that think that he'll ultimately end up at Nebraska, so he's still trying to line up his next wave of visits. There was talk of going to Nebraska spring game and Oregon spring game. I think with his own schedule, he might not be able to make those now, but he does want to take his official visits, and he's got one locked in for Georgia the first weekend of June. That's the first one set there. So I think the Bulldogs are well positioned, but Nebraska continues to show the Raiola family that this program is on the upward trajectory, and he's a guy that can help keep them there when he ultimately gets on campus, and then a lot of other prospects on campus kind of echoed the same, right? Ryan Wingo, 5-star receiver, number 6 overall player in the top 247. He talked about the facilities and talked about how the coaching staff makes them feel at home. He actually said, whoa, about the facilities, and he's visited as many powerhouse programs as any recruit in the country. He talked about Dylan and him continuing to build that bond. 5-star, the number 1 defensive lineman in the country, Williams Nwaneri, was at Nebraska this weekend. The number 1 offensive tackle in the land, Brandon Baker, was there. Both had a great time. Baker talked about, it was exciting to see what Nebraska is building, and said they have the resources to have a great program. And Nwaneri talked about the vision Coach Rule has, especially standing out to him and what he wants to do, and said that Nebraska made a good push. Now, Nwaneri also visited Ohio State this weekend, and that was a needle-moving visit for him as well. Called Larry Johnson a legend, enjoyed his talk with Ryan Day, enjoyed watching practice at Ohio State. So they're very much in the mix as well. Bring this back to Nebraska, top 247 receiver Gatlin Bear, who was a big riser into the top 50 of the recent 24/7 Sports Recruiting Rankings update. He said there's a different energy there right now at Nebraska, and that everyone in the building is on the same page trying to get that program turned around. He just loves the people there. The new facility and how devoted they are to improving development. Recovery was very impressive to him. He might be the fastest player in the country. I think Nebraska is near the top of his list. Nebraska's going to have a great chance to land Cheshire Academy top 247 defensive lineman Gerard Smith and Jacob Smith. Ian Flint's a tight end from Texas that we know Nebraska is well positioned for. Thomas Heiberger's a linebacker from South Dakota, where they may be tough to beat for him. But Jaden Riddell, Nate Frazier, Andrew Sprague, Grant Bricks were a couple of the other prominent recruits that visited this weekend as Nebraska hosted a lot of top guys, and people that were there just said the energy of the weekend was off the charts.
Yeah, I could tell just by what you're saying and by the reactions of some of these top targets. You could tell that just the way Matt Rule and his staff are building this program back up is something definitely to keep an eye on. And don't sleep on Lincoln. I've been to Lincoln, Nebraska quite a few times. Surprisingly enough, made the trip almost across the country to Lincoln from New Jersey, and it's a fun city. It's a nice city too. So don't sleep. For everyone out there listening, right? Don't sleep on Lincoln, Nebraska.
Well, it's as good a fan base as there is in college football.
Oh, yeah.
I've been there as well. It's a cool place. When you get there, you can just feel the pageantry of college football as soon as you get on their campus. And you and I are both talking about it amazing facilities.
Yeah.
I mean, they have good facilities, but I'm talking about what they're putting in. I can't wait to get a look at these new facilities that they're putting in, because all these recruits gush about the resources that Nebraska football is going to have moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So don't sleep on Lincoln, and certainly don't sleep on the Huskers and what Matt Rule is building there in Lincoln. Another big weekend, Tennessee, Knoxville. I was about to say Oxford, but Knoxville, Tennessee. They hosted some top targets as well, including one of their top quarterback targets for 2024, Jake Merklinger. Steve, what can you tell us about the big weekend in Knoxville and about what Josh Heupel and his staff were able to do to impress some of the top targets there?
Yeah, Tennessee looking for a second straight top 10 recruiting class. They're sitting at number 9 right now. And as you said, Jake Merklinger was back on campus this weekend. He enjoyed a game atmosphere during the fall, comes back this weekend, and he loved it. Got to spend a lot of quality time with the coaches. He watched them practice. He enjoyed being around the coaches and players all weekend. And, he took 2 visits to North Carolina this calendar year, but I think the momentum is now squarely with Tennessee as he nears his college decision here. Also considering Michigan State and others, but I think that Tennessee has emerged as the one to beat for Jake Merklinger following this visit to campus. Aaron Scott's a top 247 cornerback from Springfield, Ohio. That said, his Tennessee visit was great. I asked him where the ball stacked up alongside the likes of Ohio State and Michigan and some of the other programs he's looking at, and he said Tennessee's right there. He said everything there is beautiful, had a cool vibe being there. And says it's a program on the rise, winning games and competing in the SEC. That really excites him, and Tennessee, they're in the thick of it for a lot of these dudes that were on campus there. Caden Jones is a top 247 linebacker from North Carolina. He was there for the win over Alabama, came back and loved watching the guys fly around at practice and got to connect with some old teammates, Navy Schuler and Charlie Browder. So Tennessee very much in those sweepstakes. Tylen Singleton is a top 247 linebacker from Louisiana that said he loved everything about it, and the coaches made it feel like home. And I think that they're in a really good spot for Baylor School teammates, Amari Jefferson and Max LeBlanc. Amari's obviously committed there for baseball, but things are developing on the football side. But linebacker James Nesta, offensive lineman William Satterwhite, another linebacker Jordan Burns. They all really loved it. And again, Tennessee moved the needle with all these guys that were on campus this weekend. But Jake Merklinger is the one where I think that I feel best about Tennessee's chances from the weekend. I think that the Vols really made a big move with one of the most coveted quarterbacks in the country.
Yeah, and he'd be a great get, especially after in 2023, obviously getting Nico Iamaleava. So Tennessee looking to land their 2024 quarterback and took a big step this weekend, hosting Jake Merklinger. Notre Dame also had a big weekend. Let's go back up north to South Bend. Besides hiring Micah Shrewsbury as the men's basketball coach, they welcomed a ton of football recruits too, most notably one of the top defensive linemen in the 2024 class, Justin Scott, who was supposed to, or at one point was going to commit in January, then has decided to push off that decision to further his recruitment. But what can you tell us about Justin Scott's visit and really all of Notre Dame's weekend with, obviously Marcus Freeman and his staff trying to make an impression with the top targets?
Yeah, not a prospect higher on the board for Notre Dame in this cycle than Justin Scott, the number one player in Illinois, out of the Chicagoland. Notre Dame's 90 minutes from Chicago, so that's kind of their backyard on the trail. Justin Scott's been to South Bend several times. He said this was his best visit yet. He had a great time and said that something that stood out was the competitiveness and willingness to go hard as he watched practice. And then he said he can tell that he's wanted and loved there, and he wants to come back. He told Tom Loy, our Irish Illustrated insider, he wants to come back when Notre Dame has a couple more of their commits on campus, quarterback CJ Carr, receiver Cam Williams, and hang out with them when they're on campus. Notre Dame, they have the number 4 recruiting class in the country right now as they look for what I think will be their 4th or 5th straight top 10 recruiting class as they continue to keep their program as one of the top in college football, as a college football playoff contender year in and year out. Anthony Knapp from Roswell, Georgia, is an offensive lineman that was offered during his visit. He said it was amazing, and he loved every bit of it. And he enjoyed watching practice and the aggressiveness there. And obviously Notre Dame's offensive line track record and what that program brings on and off the field, I think has them well positioned there. Tom Loy has already crystal balled the Irish there. I'm going to join him. But Logan Thomas from the Lone Star State's a top 247 edge that Notre Dame covets. They had him on campus. They're trying to battle Michigan, among others, for Andrew Sprague, top 247 offensive lineman. They also had top 247 tight end Jaden Riddell in this weekend. A ton of 2025s raved about the experience, so Notre Dame getting ahead in that class as well. But Justin Scott, they're battling Georgia, they're battling Ohio State there. I think his parents love what Notre Dame brings off the field. I think proximity to home is helping Notre Dame, but they certainly have a battle on their hands with upcoming officials to Georgia and Ohio State already on the schedule.
Yeah, Justin Scott's is one of the most intriguing recruitments to watch. Not only, like I said, because he was going to originally commit in late January and then decided to push it back, but because there are so many big schools going after one of the top defensive linemen in the class. And I should have mentioned earlier, but I'll mention now, if you want to know more about Nebraska's big weekend, more about Tennessee's big weekend, and more about Notre Dame's, make sure to head on over to Husker 247 for Nebraska, go Vols 247 for Tennessee, and of course, Irish Illustrated for Notre Dame. So, Steve, I mentioned at the top of the show, you were out in Austin this past weekend for the OT7 event, and there were a ton of big recruits there, a ton of top prospects there. So I'm going to give you the floor, sir. What can you tell us about your trip to Austin, and who were some of the prospects that stood out to you watching Overtime 7-on-7?
Yeah, we're working on the article now. Oregon receiver commit Jordan Anderson's going to be our alpha dog from the event. I thought he was a touchdown waiting to happen out there. He's the number 14 receiver in the country per our ratings. He's the number 81 player overall. And as Oregon receivers kind of been one of the point of emphasis for Dan Lanning and company since they've gotten to Eugene and over the last 3 cycles now, because they finished off the 2022 class. They recruited the 2023 class, and now they're off and running in 2024 with the nation's number 8 class. Just making sure they have big play guys in that receiver room. Jordan Anderson is a guy that really shined out there this weekend. Loved the way that he played, and he'll be the alpha dog. And you'll be able to read on the 24/7 sports site many more guys who really shined on the field. But just from a recruiting standpoint, some of the big news coming out of there. I had a chance to talk to our number 1 ranked athlete, Terry Bussey, on Sunday, 5-star recruit. And he's nowhere close to making a college decision, Lance. He's going to name a top 10 at the start of his senior year and then try and make a decision by the end of his senior year. But I do think a few schools have certainly done a great job. I think Texas A&M, first and foremost, is very prominent in this recruitment. He's been to College Station several times, feels the love from the whole staff. And I think that they're a program that's going to be in it till the end. LSU, he wanted to visit there April 1 but he plays baseball and track at the same time. He's not going to be able to get over there, but LSU's a school that's positioned well for him. LSU's also positioned well for Draylon Miller, top 247 receiver from the Lone Star State. So is Texas A&M. He's excited to get out to USC in Colorado in April. So those are a couple other schools that Draylon Miller's looking hard at. But LSU and Texas A&M certainly in the mix for both of those blue chippers. Terry Bussey could play on either side of the ball. He also likes TCU, Baylor. Texas is trying to make a push there now. Tennessee, they have positioned themselves very well for a couple guys that were out there. Boo Carter, who I thought was one of the most dominant players on the field on both sides of the ball at this event. He's from Chattanooga, playing with the Sound Mind, Sound Body 7-on-7 team. Tennessee's still the one to beat there. He wants to get to Michigan soon. Also excited about Colorado, among others. And then Ricardo Jones is a top 247 safety from the Peach State that I think he said Tennessee's the team to beat. Now, Auburn's very much in there. He's been to Auburn a ton. So those two have done a great job. He's visiting Alabama soon. If they offer, that could be a game changer. Florida State's in the middle of that one, as among others. But I like where Tennessee stands with both of those touted recruits. Top 247 receiver Zion Ragens. He was the fastest player out there. Georgia, South Carolina teed up for some visits here in early April. Georgia may be tough to beat there, but he also likes Florida State and Tennessee. Quarterback Michael Hawkins, he's announcing his college decision on April 8th, and TCU and Oklahoma are the finalists. A lot of Oklahoma buzz there for him. And speaking of Oklahoma buzz, top 247 defensive back Jaden Hardy from the Lone Star State. He was arguably the top defensive back at this event, made a lot of plays on the football, very instinctual, rangy player there. I like where Oklahoma stands there. He visited there earlier this month. He's going to come back for the spring game. So the Sooners trying to get off and running here after a top 5 class last year. They landed 4-star cornerback Jeremiah Newcomb out of Arizona this week to get their class off and running. And they're starting to trend for some guys like Hawkins and Hardy who are competing at this event.
Yeah, and we see as spring is continuing and we're getting closer and closer to summer and more events are happening. There's just so much more news to discuss, so many more notes to talk about, and you can find everything you need to know about this OT7 event, as well as everything we talked about previously on the show over at 247sports.com. But Steve, that'll do it for us. No Stump Steve today. We'll have to make sure to make it extra difficult for you next Monday so that hopefully you go 0 for 3. Hopefully we get all 3 of them past you next week. We're going to try on our end, and of course, you'll be there next weekend as well. Make sure to send in your mailbag questions, of course, too. Send them over to 247 Sports on Twitter, as we will be here for another Wiltfong Whiparound episode on Friday. So for Steve Wiltfong, I am Lance Glynn. Thanks for listening. This has been the Wiltfong Whiparound.